All right, welcome to the Erie Music History Podcast. I'm Chip Shell, your host, and today we have a slightly different episode as my guest is not a musician, but he was a light man who, after working with bands like Pistol Whip, the New Younger Brothers, The Pulse, Johnny C., and probably some other ones, he went on to tour with national acts like Rick James and ZZ Top as a stage manager, lighting designer, did that for over a decade. He eventually settled down in the Washington, D.C. area and started his own event lighting design and production service, which he just retired from after 20 years. So, John Farr, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Welcome. Yes.
Did I get all that right?
You did. There was a couple others. Luther Vandross, the Daz Band, Friction from Erie, Pistol Whip.
Let's start at the beginning. You reached out to me originally and you said you were going to tell me the story of how the Stabilizers got their recording contract, and we'll lead up to that. Let's go through.
I've always, there was a lot of hearsay in that, and I'm just we'll lead up to it still, but everybody thinks that Bobby Shannon got them from
K104 or whatever.
Okay. And the truth is it's not. And we'll get into it.
Okay.
What actually happened and things like that. But it was really just the reason I sued them and things like that was because at the time we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have things like that.
Yeah.
And in getting them their deal, I ran up a bill of about $1,400 in phone calls. And I have been and still am very trusting to people when I shouldn't be. And they said I'd be taken care of, and I never was. And
okay.
But we'll get into the whole thing.
Yeah. So you mentioned Pistol Whip. So we also talked a little bit before this. You're an Erie guy that eventually goes to Northeast. And so when you graduate from Northeast, are you already working in lighting, or how did that all come about?
Actually, I never graduated.
Oh, no.
I am a high school dropout in 10th grade.
Oh, okay. All right.
1 month, 2 weeks, and 2 days, I think I made into 10th grade, and where I quit.
Okay.
And at that time I went out and chased drag racing and probably learned more on the road than I would have ever learned in high school.
Got it.
Years later, I did get a GED.
Okay.
And then even many years later, I got a associate's degree from George Washington.
All right. So we talked earlier, you were doing the drag racing circuit. You eventually owned your own dragster for a while and everything. I mean, that's in your blood, but how does lighting get into your career?
Well, I came back from California, having been out there for the World Finals drag races. I had worked at a gas station in Northeast, and I'd flown out to go to the races and help some of my friends that were racers.
What year are we talking? Early 70s?
73.
Okay. All right.
And to be quite honest, I knocked up my girlfriend.
Okay.
So I decided to stay home. I went to work at General Electric. Okay. I was painting Conrail locomotives. And some of the guys there at the factory had a band. I don't even remember their name.
Okay.
But they asked me to go out and come out and see them. Well, I don't drink alcohol. I never have. I just don't like the taste of it.
Okay. So
I went out to the bar to see these guys. Well, I was bored. So I told them, I says, I'm bored. I'm not going to come out. I got nothing to do. I don't drink. I don't smoke. And somebody said, well, why don't you do our lights? Okay, well, what's that? And they started to show me. And so I started to build my own lights, by putting like Christmas tree lights in a box and putting a reflective surface in there and a piece of plastic in front of them for them to reflect off of.
Sure.
Taking dryer tubing and putting a floodlight in it and buying some gel from somebody and doing that.
Making your own. Yeah.
Making your own. And then I started getting known around town for that. So myself and Dennis Cohen and a guy named Ed Lund went into business with a company called Blue Max Stage Lighting in Erie. And I had got fired from General Electric because I'd painted a forklift when I wasn't supposed to.
Well, you don't remember that name of that band that you were initially working for, or where you were doing
No, I
lighting and
know. I
stuff?
remember some of the players. Eddie Dietz was in it, the singer.
Okay.
Uh, John McClain was the guitar player.
All right.
I forget who was drumming.
Yeah, I'm testing your memory. I know, and
And
people will chime in, I'm sure.
Ed Bernick, the photographer in
Oh,
Erie, he was the bass player.
sure. Okay.
I
Yeah.
think the
Yeah.
band was called Charge.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Chuck Rosequest was the drummer.
All right.
But anyways, I went out and I was helping them, and that's how I got started doing lighting and Blue Max stage lighting, because Dennis was a very entrepreneurial. We ended up doing some bigger stuff, and I worked my way up to the Pulse.
Well, the bigger stuff, like, are we talking about like Erie Day or Erie
No, it
Arts
was
Festival
before
and things
Erie.
like that?
It
Or
was before that. For instance, I put the Warner Theater had a bid out for follow spots. Okay, and since I was working at the Warner Theater as a stagehand quite often, union stagehand, we got the bid for that particular item, and I ended up selling follow spots to the Warner Theater. They've since been replaced by newer models, but
sure. So you were doing that like on the side as a
yes,
stagehand?
we're doing that on the side.
Gotcha. And so that's 73. So you do that for a couple years. Eventually you work for and drive that old Furch's bread truck for Pistol Whip,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I mean, how does that come about? I mean, is it the same thing? Like they reach out to you?
I have a friend from Northeast named Bob Rychek who has passed away, and Bob was a one of a kind guy. Okay, he was a womanizer. He was a lead singer. He was a sound man. He was a drug dealer. He was everything.
Okay.
But he was, on top of that, he was a great guy.
Yeah.
Okay. And Bob got me to come out and help Pistol Whip. And I liked Pistol Whip. I liked the whole punk scene. I thought their songs were really good. Rick DeBello, John Drum, Rick Madeira, Jim DeMonte. We did a lot of running around the area, running around the country.
That's what I was gonna say. You traveled a lot with them, right?
Yes, we traveled a lot with them.
What did that entail for you? I mean, were you just doing lights, or were you kind of roadie also? And
we were kind of a do-all everything.
Was it just you, or was there?
No, it was probably me and one other guy, me and Rychek.
Okay.
Sometimes Rychek would sing.
Oh.
Sometimes he would be the sound man.
And was Bill Cotter in the band at the time, or?
Yeah, well, Bill was in and out of the band quite often, and that's when you got Rychek.
Oh, gotcha.
We also had Jeff Ford.
All right.
Okay.
All
right. So there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of going different places, a lot of getting one hotel room and having 8 guys sleep in the one hotel room.
And was your lighting gear or rig all homemade at this point?
No, most of it came from a company called Altman in Yonkers, New York. And what I did, because a lot of people were buying lights for their different bands, I would buy, say, a light for $25, my cost as a dealer, and then I'd sell it used for $35 because that was cheaper than somebody in Cleveland was selling it for. And then I just buy myself a new one and make $10, and I always had nice new gear.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I was very, as I said, mechanical. So I was able to build things and, design things and make things. I had trussing and things like that that I used TV antenna tower to make and stuff like that. And so, most of the bands that I actually did lights for had a fairly decent light show.
Yeah. Which back then must have been a differentiator.
Yes. And that was part of, getting them booked,
Yeah.
Dennis had Progressive Talent, which was booking a lot of bands, and
was he booking you guys? Pistol Whip?
I says no. Progressive hadn't come into play by then.
Oh, okay.
But he booked the Pulse when I worked for the Pulse.
Oh, gotcha. Right. And I mean, like you said, traveling with Pistol Whip, a band of that nature. I mean, punk band like that. There had to be some crazy venues that you played and some crazy nights, I'm sure.
There was places, as an example, there's a place called the Step in Williamsport, PA. We called it the Slip In. They gave us rooms. The rooms consisted of a mattress on the floor and for lighting, you had a one bulb that just plugged into the wall. That was the whole thing.
Yeah.
I spent 2 nights one time in the truck in Monroeville because the truck broke down and we didn't want to leave the gear. So I slept 2 nights in the truck. We played a lot of places. We did, a lot of crazy.
One-nighters usually?
Mostly one-nighters, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So literally that was your paying your dues days back then.
It went from about Hagerstown to probably Albany to Chicago, south to probably the bottom of West Virginia.
Okay, all right. And that was your primary job at the time?
Yes, that was my only job at the time.
That was your only job at the time?
Yes.
And still living in Northeast?
Well, we lived in Erie then.
Oh, okay, all right.
Because I had gotten married to the girl that my wife at the time.
Right.
So we lived in Erie up on the projects up on Crestmont.
Okay.
In Crestmont, somewhere.
So does that lead you to working with Johnny C, or was there anything in between?
Johnny C was kind of in between working with other groups.
Okay.
Johnny C came to me and he wanted me to put together a lighting show, and he only did short little tours.
And tell folks about Johnny C, what he was all about.
Well, Johnny C was an Elvis impersonator.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? His name's John C. Ferraro.
Okay.
He's currently I assume, quite wealthy because him and Farr,
Danny Carr?
Danny Carr.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They started a thing called American Gladiators.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, of which we all know is the TV show American Gladiator.
Right, right.
And as we know that there's been various spin-offs and things like that, so I'm assuming but we used to go out for 6 weeks at a time, and he'd do Elvis shows.
Yeah.
And he'd just hire me to go out and, be with him, and I'd fit it in when I could. And when I couldn't, I'd, go where the money was, quite frankly, which generally was with Johnny C.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, he had that band Taxis that had Henry T on guitar, Ron Sutton on drums, Tim Popotnick on keys, and Steve Witkowski on bass. So all these guys are accomplished Erie musicians.
Yes.
Did I miss anybody?
No, but we traveled with a hairstylist.
Wow.
There was me.
An announcer too, right?
Yeah, there was an announcer. There was, because you had to have somebody that gave Elvis scarfs side stage. And he actually was pretty good. I mean, I have to admit that Johnny C himself was weird, strange. He was just an interesting guy.
Gotcha.
But when he sang, he was actually a good Elvis impersonator.
Yeah, yeah.
We used to go down to Seven Springs and do Mary Kay Cosmetics, would have a convention down there, and he'd get keys and underwear thrown up on stage when he
yeah.
I believe he ended up marrying Flora Cafaro, which the Cafaros own the Mill Creek Mall.
Sure, right. And I imagine that the lodgings that you got with Johnny C were a little bit better than you got with Pistol Whip.
Most of them were better. They were true hotels, and you got your own room, and
right.
Sometimes you have to share it, because there was just one availability, but it was a lot of fun.
But you only did that once in a while?
Yeah, we'd do it for like 6 weeks, and then there'd be like a 3-month break, and then we'd go out and do, 10 days.
Okay.
That type stuff.
All right. And so you do that for a while. Is that what leads you to doing the New Younger Brothers, working with them, or was there?
Yes. Well, that was the Younger Brothers was Angela Arduini Fells. She rest in peace. Great woman.
Yeah.
Great singer. Brian Fells, Ron Sadowski.
Bob Sadowski, you mean? Or Ron?
Bob Sadowski.
Yep.
Yeah. Bob Sadowski, Randy Peck, Brett Fells. And at various times we'd have different horn players, or we'd have different drummers, different people.
Dave Cathy was in there. How about Vinny?
Yeah.
Vinny Younger was in, obviously.
Vinny Younger and Paul Younger.
Oh, okay. Paul was there too.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Actually, Paul taught me a lot about show business. He taught me a lot about how you don't sound check in front of the audience. You learn how to create a scene with the lighting. We did with the New Younger Brothers. We did they were a lounge act.
Sure.
And we did usually the second set of the night was, at the time, the Barbra Streisand movie A Star Is Born was very big.
Mm-hmm.
We did a whole set of that music. Okay. And Angela was incredible singer covering Barbra Streisand. And so there was, excuse me, scenes where I would try to replicate the movie, and get very good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that, Paul would give you tips or, well, I mean.
Yeah. He would tell me how to do things, and we'd talk about it and I'd come up with something and he'd, like that. And,
yeah.
I owe a lot to Paul and Angela.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you work with them for a while?
Yeah. I've went with them for probably a year and a half. I mean, we went to as far as Milwaukee. We'd gone to Albany, traveling around the country with them.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. It got to where I ended up quitting because I'll be honest, at the time, I had what my mother used to call itchy. I didn't stay in one place too long.
Yeah.
So.
And you were married and had a kid at the time,
I was married, had a kid.
Right.
Things like that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't realize that they toured that much like that all over the place. So that's interesting. Yeah. And when you're traveling with them, like we mentioned, the old Furch bread truck with pistol whip. I mean, at this point, do you have your own stuff, a van, or is there a band?
When I was with the younger brothers, we'd have a rental truck.
You would? Okay. Yeah. All right. Got it.
I remember specifically going to Milwaukee, and the club owner there told us that we need to drain the antifreeze because it was going to get lower than the antifreeze could get cold. We didn't. We were okay, but.
And all the lighting is yours at this point, right?
All the lighting was mine. Yeah.
Okay. And are you renting it out to anybody else at this point, or?
No.
I mean,
no. It was almost always, the band I was with.
Yeah.
It was mine, and I build things. I built my first lighting board. I would design ways to hang lights or ways to put lights up and things like that were different than everybody else.
So the new Younger Brothers was the early 80s or late 70s, early 80s, like that, or?
I would say probably 77.
Okay.
70, somewhere in there.
And did you have like an actual lighting console, or was it one of your homemade ones at this point?
At that point, it was my homemade one.
Okay. Because I wondered how technology kind of caught up, or was it a matter of being able to afford it?
The fact that I was working at the Warner as a union stagehand through Vinnie Marchant back then.
Yeah.
I got to see a lot of the upgraded, newer lighting consoles. But the one I had, was what I could afford. I built it myself. It was basically 6 rotary dimmers like you'd have on your wall at Hallam.
Yeah.
But on each channel, I had 3 switches. So I could plug in, say, like as many as 12 lights into those 3 channels. And I would, dim up one, flip a switch, and then be able to dim that one back, down. And, so that I had a lot of lights and a lot of control, but I had to remember how to do it.
Yeah, right. Right.
And since I knew how to do it.
Yeah. And so you've mentioned the Pulse a few times. Is that the next step?
Let's see. Yeah, probably. I probably went to the Pulse after that.
And so I've talked to Bob Berger. You just went and saw the Weaklings, right?
Actually, I'm seeing them tomorrow.
Oh, no way. Okay. Yeah. That's great.
They're playing here. They're playing here in a club in Vienna, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
And they're playing the next night, Friday, in Richmond.
Very cool. Are you going to get to talk to Bob, or?
Oh yeah, I talk to him all the time.
That's great.
Yeah.
So he and his brother, obviously, and Toon and Marty formed the Pulse. And
right.
Are you at the beginning of that? Do they bring you in, or?
Yes,
okay.
I actually worked for the Fabulous Nobodies.
You did? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Which is what they evolved into.
For about 3 weeks.
Okay.
Which they evolved into.
Right. Right.
Okay. And that was just to finish up some gigs. I mean, I actually was working for the Pulse, but we had to finish up some gigs as the Fabulous Nobodies because they'd been previously booked.
Sure. So
I did that.
So how did you come to, be working for those guys? Did you know them from other bands, or?
Dennis.
Oh, okay. All right.
because Dennis was managing them.
Ah,
Okay.
okay.
So it was through Dennis, and at the time I was the only lighting company per se in town.
Right. Right.
So they hired me.
And I know that they go down to Florida and they travel around. The band
Yep.
evolves and
We went to
everything. And
Florida.
you went
Yeah.
with them everywhere.
Pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
Florida was fun. I remember we had a Ford truck that had a fuel pump go out, and I put a fuel pump in the truck on the side of the road in a pouring rain.
Oh, jeez.
But it was a great time. I mean, it
Yeah.
was really a great time, and I think you have a picture of us all sitting on a slide over.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the week that I put that was taken in Tampa, and the fuel pump was put in between Lakeland and Tampa.
Oh, so you're in that picture.
I'm in that picture. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Because Dickie's in the band at that point, right? Dickie Buckle? Or no? No, I thought he was in the front. Looked like him. So it's
me, the four Pulse members, and Bob Rychek.
Oh, okay. I'm mixing it up. So I apologize to Dickie Buckle. So yeah, Florida, you guys are traveling around. I mean, then they get their big break. I mean, how was that for you?
Well, the Pulse, I kept working with them, and I got to a certain point where I quit.
Okay.
And I quit because I got an opportunity to work with the Iron City Houserockers.
That's what I figured.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was because the Pulse was opening for them quite often.
Yeah, I saw that.
And then the Houserockers wanted another guy for the stage, not lighting.
Mm.
They wanted someone to take care of the stage. And their road manager, Jay Flory, who has passed away about 4 years ago, he thought that I could do it. So Eric Johnson from the Living Dead Band,
yeah,
teaches me how to tune a guitar.
Yeah, I was going to say, what does it mean to be the stage manager?
Okay, it means that you set up everything on the stage, and you stand side stage when the show's going on.
Okay.
I also had to tune guitars. That was one of the job requirements. I don't play an instrument. I don't know shit about guitars.
Yeah.
But I do know EADGBE.
All right, good.
Okay? I do know how to use a strobe tuner, and so I tune guitars with, for them.
Yeah.
Was it perfect? No, I can honestly tell you there was sometimes I'd tune it an octave higher or tune it an octave lower, and I didn't know the difference because I'm not a musician.
Sure. Right.
But most of the time I got it right.
And did you know Eric? Did you know the Living Dead Band? Had you seen them before?
The Living Dead Band and Pistol Whip ran in the same circles.
Yeah, sure. Right.
We were in Hagerstown one time, and I can remember that the Living Dead Band stayed in the same room with us. We had like 16 people in the room. Sheriff came in the middle of the night, threw us all out. We had to pay, I think they ended up, at that time, I think they had to pay $10 per head for people that were in the room, and it was just the way you did things back then.
Yeah, being their stage manager, didn't they travel with a coffin or something? Or
yeah, they did. I didn't actually work for them.
No, I know, but I was just thinking,
yeah.
That must have been an experience too. Yeah.
I mean, they were, there was a lot of great, Erie groups back then, Snowmen, things like that.
Right. All right. So you're with Joe Grachecki, and how's that going?
That was going well. I was opening, we were opening for bigger groups. One of the groups that we opened for had a road manager, Andre O'Neill. Andre O'Neill was the Daz Band's road manager.
Okay.
So he got me working for the Daz Band. The Daz Band was a, funk black group that was out of Cleveland, had a Grammy. They did a song called
You Dropped the Bomb, or is that what it was?
Which one?
Was it You Dropped the Bomb on Me, or is that?
No, that was the Gap Band.
That's the Gap Band. I mixed those two up.
But we ended up, I ended up working for them.
Okay.
Through Andre, I met different people. Okay. The different people that I met, one of them ended up working for ZZ Top. He was the road manager on the Eliminator tour.
Okay.
And they lost their bass guitar tech. Okay. And at that time, I was also the Daz Band. I was also doing stage for. So they lost their bass guitar tech. He called me, said, "Am I available?" I said, "Sure." and I went to work for ZZ Top as their bass guitar tech for the last part of the Eliminator tour.
Wow. How was that?
That was great.
I mean, that was the height of ZZ Top.
Yes, it was a big deal. I mean, you were treated like kings. I mean, it was one of the greatest gigs I had.
And I mean, I know, Billy's guitars are crazy. I mean, was Dusty's bass, funky too at the time?
Well, yeah. I mean, it ended up that there was 3 people that worked for ZZ when I worked for him, a guy named Donnie Emerson, Jimmy, and I don't remember his last name, and me. And I assumed that I would be tuning the guitars and things like that. Well, they did it differently. I took care of setting all the amplifiers up and things like that on stage.
Okay.
They took care of the guitars in the dressing room and would tune them and have them ready.
Okay.
All I did is basically hand the guitar to Dusty.
Okay. Gotcha.
So it was a great gig, a lot of fun, a lot of, traveling, things like that.
Just US, or did you go overseas too?
Nope. I only went to one gig in Canada.
Okay.
Like I said, it was the last part of the tour.
Sure. Right.
Okay. So we went to the one in Vancouver, Canada.
Okay. All right. And so does that lead you to Rick James somehow, or how does that?
It does. That led me to Rick James because the sound company, Showco, was doing ZZ Top. And the guy, Lonnie, who was doing ZZ Top, ended up going to work for Showco, recommended me to Showco and to ZZ Top, or to Rick James.
Yeah.
And I end up going over there.
Okay. And when you say over there, where are you based? I mean,
I'm still based in Erie.
You are? Oh, okay. Yeah. So you just go on the road
out,
wherever.
Right.
Got it.
Rick James, for instance, we did pre-production, which is pre-production on a U.S. tour means you're in a venue for about a week. And then after the week is up, you do your final, you do the show at that venue.
Right.
And then you start the tour.
Yep.
Okay. And that's where you put everything together. In other words, while you're there, things are being shipped in, you're changing things, you're doing things, you know what I mean?
Yep. That's how Judas Priest did it at the field house.
Yes. And that's why they ended up with more stuff than they're supposed to have.
Right. Yeah. Because, you and I first connected through the Fieldhouse book, I think.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So how was Rick James? I mean, ZZ Top's one thing. I mean, I'm sure 1,000 people have said to you, "Oh, how are ZZ Top?" But I mean, Rick James is a character, man.
Well, to be honest, in my opinion, there is 2 Rick Jameses. There's the Rick James that is at home, that I've watched the Buffalo Bills with, that I've talked to, that was somewhat of a nice guy.
Yeah.
And there's the Rick James that steps outside that door.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah.
That has to have that persona of being Rick James.
All right.
Kind of like Dean Martin. Okay.
Sure.
I don't know if you know, Dean Martin didn't drink.
No.
But he played a drunk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah.
So kind of like him.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
He went outside. He became Rick James, the rock star and the person. But in his house up in Orchard Park, New York, which...
Oh, that's why he's a Bills fan.
Yes,
gotcha. Okay.
I was lucky enough to be able to take some people to, for instance, Elisa Guida. I don't know if you know Elisa Guida.
Yeah, right. I know the name. Okay. Yeah.
She was at Rick James's house.
Okay.
Anyways, a couple other I took up there at the time,
How long did you work with Rick?
2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And always on the road. What album was he promoting?
I mean, the touring is not, when you tour, you're not out for 2 years. What you do is you go out for maybe 6 months on a big tour like that, and then you're off for maybe 3 months. Then they'll go out and they'll do a month, and then they'll be off for 3 months.
Okay.
And if you're like I was, a freelance, stagehand, you try to pick up gigs here and there in between stuff.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
You know what I mean? And that's why things like the Warner Theater, I would pick up working at the Warner.
Got it.
Or working at the new convention center when it opened,
Right.
That type stuff.
I read an article that you wrote, a letter to the editor that you wrote when the Civic Center first opened, and people were complaining about how loud some of the bands were. And you were like, "Hey, listen, I've traveled all over the place. It's not the Civic Center's problem. It's the band that comes in and they determine that volume and everything." And I thought it was real interesting. You had some real firsthand experience at that point.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't realize who controls things.
Yeah.
Even today, sometimes when you go into a venue, the artist has the say over who sits where, how many seats are going to sell.
Oh, wow.
How much t-shirts are going to cost. Okay. But there's a lot of things that they don't have say over. For instance, some venues charge as much as 50% on a t-shirt. So that means that the artist, maybe he's selling t-shirts for $45, and you're thinking, well, that's crazy. Well, you got to look at it. He's got to give, $23 to the venue for every t-shirt he sells. He's got to pay for the t-shirts. He's got to pay for transporting the t-shirts. He's got to pay the guy to sell the t-shirt.
Right.
$45 isn't that bad.
Yeah.
Start adding it all up. It's unfortunate, but everybody nowadays wants to put their hand in your pocket.
Right.
And,
yeah. I'm sure you saw that evolve over the years that you were on the road with these folks.
Yes. I mean, there used to be a time where, if you wanted to book ZZ Top, as an example, you would call up their management, who would put you in touch with their booking agent, and their booking agent would tell you, well, where are you going to do it at? Okay. And you maybe say the Warner Theater or the Civic Center. And they'd say, okay, well, they cost this much money. We need all the money up front. And let's just say you decide to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, you get all the money up front. You only sell 30 tickets. You lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
But let's hope you sell the place out. Well, back then, if you sold the place out, they got their money. You got your money. You made some money. Big deal. Well, nowadays it's changed. Now, Live Nation takes care of a lot of the booking. They own a lot of the venues.
Right.
Okay. And a lot of the acts can't play for someone else because then Live Nation will not let them play their venues.
Sure. Got it.
So Live Nation's got a very big stronghold on the whole industry.
Right. That's what I've always heard. Yeah.
Okay. And it hurts the little guys and it hurts the little venues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it hurts smaller bands. I mean, once you're a big band, you have a little bit of say, but even then.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so you go from working with Rick James for a few years, and then what happens? Does that lead us to the Stabilizers? Because we're in the 80s.
Then I kind of came home.
Okay.
Rick James, the promoter for Rick James is a guy named Al Heyman. Okay. Al Heyman now is known as a very reclusive promoter for big name fighters. Like Merriweather, Manny Pacquiao, or whatever his name is.
Right.
Al Heyman manages them. But back then, he also managed concerts. Okay. So me trying to work my way into being a bigger deal than just a stagehand, Al would fly me out to Indianapolis or fly me out to Milwaukee or fly me in or let me drive into Cleveland or things like that, where I would be the promoter rep. So, to the show going on, I was the promoter.
Sure. Yeah.
I wasn't. I was just the promoter rep, and everybody knew that because it was an Al Heyman production.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I did a show at Budweiser Superfest at the Spectrum in Philly, where I had Tina Marie and Earth, Wind and Fire and a couple other big, black groups.
Sure.
Where I was the promoter rep, Generally Al would come in, or Al's brother would come in somewhere around 11 o'clock at night. He'd settle up with the box office and he'd be gone. And my job was to make sure that all the dressing rooms were assigned, people went on stage on when they're supposed to, give out backstage passes, whatever it was.
Yeah.
I was trying to work my way up in the industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Through that, I also was talking quite often with, and this is going to get into how the Stabilizers got signed.
Perfect.
I worked with a guy named Leroy Johnson. Leroy was an attorney. He was also Rick's brother, Rick James's brother.
Okay.
Leroy was in Buffalo. Now, I'm trying to get bands signed. There was a band from Erie called Sky's the Limit. They were out of the JFK
Center. Right.
Center. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I took their tape to Leroy, and he was interested in them.
Okay.
Leroy then turned and gave them a contract. The contract was about 35 pages, and it listed everything on it. I mean, if they had a shoelace that had their band name on it, his company was getting a piece of it. Okay. Well, the band kind of scared off on that.
Sure.
and rightly so. And Leroy wanted me to find other acts. Well, the next one I found was the Stabilizers. And I thought they're a pretty good act. You know, they've got some songs out. At the time, they had Tyranny out locally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took them to Leroy.
So you didn't know Rich Nevins or Dave Christensen at this point. You just knew that of them playing around town.
I did ask them if I could do that.
Okay, so
yeah. I knew Rich and Dave.
Okay. All right.
And so, yes, I shopped it to, I shopped their tape to Rick James's brother, Leroy.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Leroy, he's in black music. Okay.
Right.
But he shops it to a guy at Columbia Sony Records in California who was the black A&R guy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, the black A&R guy, he doesn't know shit about a group like the Stabilizers. So he takes it to the head of A&R at Sony Records or Columbia. His name is Denny Deonte.
Right.
Denny Deonte produced Johnny Mathis, Barbra Streisand, 50 bands. I know he's
for sure.
A big deal.
Yep.
So I keep talking to Denny Deonte as if I'm the manager of the Stabilizers. Now you have to keep in mind that there's nothing on paper. It's just my word and their word that we're all going to be in this together.
Okay. Got it.
Denny then flies out to Erie. Okay.
Yep.
And he meets with Leroy, me, the Stabilizers, and we go to the Peninsula Inn.
Right.
And Bev gets us a real good place to sit. And Denny watches the Stabilizers, watches the crowd, the whole thing. We leave there. And since at that time I was working at Billy's at the Hilton, we went back to Billy's after the show at the Peninsula Inn. And since I had some pull at the Hilton, we all went into the lounge after it closed and we sat down and talked for a while.
Right. This is 1985.
84. In roughly June or July of 84.
Okay.
So everybody, agrees that this is a good act and blah, blah, blah. So Denny goes back to California, says he'll get in touch. Okay. So I'm assuming he's going to get in touch with Leroy and Leroy's going to call me and this is how it's done.
Yep.
Well, Denny calls me and he says, John, he says, we'd like to sign the band. He says, and these are his words I can remember them. He says, I can't see a lily white band working under a black umbrella. He says, so I'd like you guys to come out to LA and meet someone. And I thought about it because it means I'm going to basically screw Leroy because he's the one that got us that far. But at the time, the bigger picture was worth it. So they pay to have me, David, and Rich fly to LA. They put us up in a hotel. We met with a company called Management 3.
Right.
Management 3 was Jerry Weintraub. Okay, we went and had lunch with Jerry Weintraub over someplace on Rodeo Drive. Don't remember the place, but I remember I had pigeon.
Okay.
I didn't know that at the time. I ordered something called scrod, and it looks like chicken on a piece of lettuce. And I ate it when we left. He said, you know what that was? And I said, chicken, I think. He says, no, it was pigeon. Okay. Anyway.
And meanwhile, Leroy does not know that you're there, or have you already?
No, Leroy does not know that we're there.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So we leave there, and I said to Weintraub and Denny and another guy, I forget his name, but I said, let me go talk to the band and we'll see where we're at. And Dave and Rich were like, yes, we want to go through with it. Okay. So we went in and they had a 1-page contract. And Dave and Rich signed it right there that day at Management 3 in front of Denny. And
that's a management contract. That's not a record contract at this point.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And you still don't have a contract, and neither does Leroy. And
I'm still going on
the word. Yeah. Right. Right.
The band says I'll be taken care of. Blah blah blah.
Okay.
Even Management 3 said, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of you, John." But there's nothing on paper, and I at the time I didn't realize it, but I probably should have been signing something too.
Sure.
But
right.
I was very trusting, and it's bit me quite a few times in my life. Not just with them, but different things.
Yeah.
We fly back home. I call Leroy and tell him they signed with Management 3. Wasn't anything I could do about it. Probably gave him some lie at that time. he isn't real happy and doesn't want to talk to me. And to be quite frank, hasn't talked to me since.
Okay.
But I think we're still going with, I'm still part of the Stabilizers. Okay, well then.
And let me check you for a second. So also, the Stabilizers obviously had other guys in the band when they were performing at the PI, but at some point, Denny says, "Hey, I just want those two guys."
Well, truly, the Stabilizers were just those two guys. Rich wrote songs, Dave sang the songs.
Right.
Rich wrote, pretty much the material. And
okay.
The other guys in the band, from what I understand, didn't really want to pursue it.
Oh, okay. That's what I was going to ask, is what was that like for them? Or
yeah. So I think, Denny and the management just said, we don't really need those guys. We just need you two.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. All right.
And then the next thing I know, they're moving to California and I'm not. Okay. Now, at the time I was doing other things also. I was probably still working with some local bands. I was also, We Love Erie days. I was the entertainment chairman when the Stabilizers played downtown.
Yeah.
And we had close to 6,000 people down there for which they thought was amazing because nobody had ever done that before.
I was there. Yeah. Yeah.
That was right around that time. And they're going to move to California. Okay. And they got signed by Columbia.
Yep.
And I'm really not part of it anymore. Okay. And I'm calling to keep in touch with them and talking to them and things like that. And after a while, I couldn't get a hold of them and things like that. And I had bills. I had, like I said, about $1,400 in phone bills. I had other little miscellaneous things that I'd paid for, mailings and stuff like that. And I thought that I was going to be taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When I sued them, I used a guy named David Ridge, who was Tom Ridge's brother.
Sure. Yep.
David Ridge ended up suing them. It was in the papers. I believe we considered it a verbal contract. I don't think it ever really went anywhere.
Yeah, I wondered about that. I saw the article about it and didn't know
I don't
whatever
think
transpired.
It really finalized or whatever. I don't really remember. But I know I didn't get anything. And I know that they ended up putting out Management 3 ended up putting out a press release that the whole John had nothing to do with it, that it was Bobby Shannon from K104 that did it. I've known Bobby for years. We grew up in Northeast together. He's a great guy, but he really had nothing to do with signing the.
And at that time, he was the program director, or what was he on?
I don't know. I know
it was like a DJ or something, but he hadn't. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
And all I was really trying to do was recover some of the money, and hopefully get some of the time that I spent back, with additional funds.
Right.
Then the album comes out. Okay. Now keep in mind that it took them close to 18 months from the time they got signed till the time they put the album out.
Okay.
The songs that they had, Tyranny, One Simple Thing, some of those songs had played in Erie and had gone over very well.
Mm-hmm.
It was around the time that Tears for Fears had Just Want to Rule the World or whatever it was called.
Yeah, Everybody Wants to Rule the World.
Everybody wants to rule the world. 18 months after that market's dead.
You mean that sound?
That sound.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's what happened. Okay. But once the album came out, did I get a credit on the sleeve? Yes. I'm there mixed in with everybody else, mixed in with the lady Bev from the Peninsula Inn, mixed in with, as just what I call an also ran. Okay. Meaning when you're drag racing, everybody knows who the winner is. And then there's the also rans.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Okay? It's always made me a bit angry that I didn't get bigger credit because in my opinion, other than the music, okay, the album wouldn't have if it hadn't been for me shopping it wherever I shopped it and how it got to where it was. Okay. Since then I've gotten over it. I realized, it was my own fault for not getting things on paper, for trusting people. Okay. For thinking that people will do the right things when they don't always do the right thing.
Sure. And during those 18 months that they were out there and you're trying to reach them, you never get a hold of them. You never hear from them.
I couldn't get much a hold of them. I occasionally would, be able to get a hold of them. I even went out one time, when they were in the recording studio, and saw them, and they were very lip service. They didn't really say anything, John management's handling that. You need to talk to them.
Sure. Right. Right. And so the album comes out and, like you said, your name's on it and everything. I mean, do you stay in touch with them? What ends up happening with your
No, because
relationship with them?
once the suit happened, they kind of went their way.
Sure.
I kind of paid attention to them, but I didn't really, talk to them much.
Yeah.
Since then, I've seen Rich Nevins at LDI a couple of times.
What's LDI?
It's a lighting show in Vegas.
Okay.
Okay, but it also has audio stuff. Rich went on to work for a big audio company called SSL, where they make studio mixing consoles that are worth $500,000.
Got it. Okay.
And he was working there.
How was that? I mean, running into Rich years later.
It was nice. He was kind of standoffish. I mean, but he would, he'd talk to me and how you doing, things like that. We never really talked about the the things that went on back then.
Mm-hmm.
I wished him well. I mean, I have to admit, if I was managing that band, they would have probably gone in the studio when they went into the studio. But Tyranny was pretty good the way it was when it was recorded in Erie. And I probably released it on Columbia as a single from the upcoming album,
right.
And send it out like that to get some momentum going. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Taking them into a studio for 18 months, in my opinion, just killed them, and that's why they never became bigger than they.
And didn't Dave go on to work in the industry too, in some respect?
I believe he did. Yeah, I've never seen Dave and don't know anything of him other than the fact that he passed away recently.
Right. In 2017, he passed away. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. I didn't know if there was ever any contact beyond that.
No.
Yeah.
And so I kind of just let it go from there,
right.
And moved on with my life.
Never heard from Leroy again.
Never heard from Leroy again. Yeah.
And at that point, we're talking about the late 80s. So what is your, at this point, have you moved already? Or
I did move to Pittsburgh. I ended up working for the City of Pittsburgh Parks and Recreation Department as a special events coordinator.
Oh, okay.
Which is in Pittsburgh is basically a sound and lighting guy for the city.
Oh, okay.
And I'd go out and do sound and lighting for bands and show movies in the park and, that type stuff.
Okay. Who were some of the hot bands back then? The Clarks or?
Most of them were, just local garage bands, no name. I mean,
okay.
The only one I can think of that we did was Tim Ironman and East Coast Offering, I think.
Okay. All right.
That type stuff.
All right.
Because the bands, it was for free.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
And usually it was before a movie or something. It was something to warm up the crowd before the movie. But
you're a city employee at this point.
Yes, I was a city employee.
Okay.
That's where I started volunteering as a EMT, and then I became a paramedic. And that's how that got into my blood.
Okay. Yeah.
And then in 1984.
Your lawsuit was in 86.
Yeah, I started that job around in 87, and I worked up until sometime in 88, where I got a call from Al Heyman, who said, "Can you design a set for Gladys Knight and take it out on the road?" And so what they did is they bought a set from 38 Special, and I redesigned it, gave City Parks 2 days notice, and went out on the road with Gladys Knight.
Okay.
July 9th of 88, we played in DC at RFK Stadium, Budweiser Superfest. I found out the DC Fire Department was hiring. Since I had been volunteering up in Pittsburgh, I applied to DC Fire Department in 88, and I went to work for the DC Fire Department and
as a paramedic.
As a paramedic, and haven't worked for a band since.
Wow. And so you did that for a while and then eventually started your own business?
Yeah, in 99, when you work in the fire department, you work 72 hours on, 24 hours on, 72 hours off. And everybody gets a part-time job because you have so much off time.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Usually it's when you buy a house or something substantial. I had bought a house. I decided I was going to get a part-time job. I went to work for a company called Kinetic Artistry down here, freelancing. The freelancing turned into working at a certain venue called the Torpedo Factory quite often. The lady at the Torpedo Factory asked me if I could how come when Kinetic Artistry is here and you're not here? Because I was still working for the fire department at that time.
Mm-hmm.
When you're not here, they're always screwing things up, tripping breakers and things like that. But when you're here, everything works fine. And I said, because I know what I'm doing. And she came in to ask me one time, she says, why don't you just buy some lights and I'll start referring people to you instead of Kinetic? And I thought about it, since at the time I had a house, I had a garage, I had a minivan.
There you go.
And I thought, okay, fine. So I called Upstaging in New York, which is a major concert company, and bought some used gear, and started doing lighting for weddings and bar mitzvahs and corporate events at the Torpedo Factory. And that snowballed into catering companies asking me, can you do lighting over at this venue? Can you do it? And I'd look at my fire department schedule and say, yeah, I can do that. And then suddenly I'm starting to take days off from the fire department to do shows. And then I'm starting to hire people to do shows because I can't get days off. And before I know it, I have a company. And so for the last 23 years, I left the fire department in 2004. And for the last 23 years, I've been, doing weddings and corporate events and things like that in Washington, D.C.
Your days of rock bands has been over.
Yes, my days of rock bands are over.
Yeah.
I occasionally go see people. I like the Weaklings, like Donnie, Joe Gashek, go up and see them, reminisce a little bit.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, when the show's over, it's nice to be able to just say, hey, it's been nice. I'll see you later.
Yeah, I'll see. I'm good. I'll be home in an hour. Yeah.
And I sometimes miss it. But the reality is it's not like it used to be.
Sure. Right.
When I was with Rick James, as an example, I took care of the stage. There was a guitar guy. There was a band guy, sound company, and lighting company. Now there's so many people that are so specialized. And so many people that honestly feel that the public is there to see whatever they're doing, as well as the band, and that this show could not go on without them. And I was always brought up on the fact that the act is the show.
Right.
Okay. You're there to make them look good, not to be part of the act.
Right.
Okay. That type of stuff.
Yep. Yeah, the industry's changed a lot, and I'm sure, like you said, the mentality of the workers has changed a lot too. But
I have to admit, it hasn't been all roses. I mean, when I worked for Donnie Iris, I get a quick story where I worked for Donnie Iris. We're playing in New York City at a place called Trax, very famous in New York City.
Just like when Donnie's at the height of.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
But we're in New York City. All the MCA recording artists are there, or all the record execs are there. It's my job to introduce the band. Okay, well, I'd been up for quite a while, and I was probably using something to keep me awake that most people don't do anymore.
Sure.
But it was the 80s. I walked out on stage, and since I had previously worked for the Iron City Houserockers, I walked out on stage, and with the loudest voice I can say, I walked out and went, ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome MCA recording artist, the Iron City, Donnie Iris and the Cruisers.
Oh, no.
And the place, you could have heard a pin drop. I mean, just a huge mistake, How
was Donnie after that?
I never introduced the band again.
No.
I mean, shit happens. The Daz Band, we played in Muskegon, Michigan. Second date on the tour. I was a guitar tech. I packed up all my guitars, set them on the floor, went and got the truck, backed the truck up to the door. The stage manager was sending all the cases out. I loaded all the cases into the truck. He says, I'll see you in Denver. I left. I drove the Ryder truck to Denver. 3 days later, we go into Denver. We're opening for Rick James that night. Nichols Arena, I think it's called. I'm opening the truck and where's my guitars? Where are the guitars? Not a single guitar made it in the truck. The stage was about 3 foot high, and when I put them on the floor, you couldn't see them from where and the stage manager who was sending everything out never did an idiot check and went in and looked around.
Oh,
we had left 7 guitars, every guitar the band had, in Muskegon, Michigan, 3 days earlier. And when we called there, they conveniently said,
no one's seen them.
Nobody has seen.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Luckily, one of the union stagehands in Denver's brother owned a music store. He opened the store and got the band some guitars to play that night.
Holy shit.
They were going to fire me, but since we were on a tour. They kept me on for the following week. They kept me on when we got back to Cleveland. They said, John, take your stuff and go home. But we got one more show in Detroit. When I came back in to do the show in Detroit, I figured that was my last show with them. At that show, they asked me to stay on as the stage manager and they fired the stage manager because they realized that it wasn't really my fault. It was stage manager's fault.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And even though I knew that I was being fired in a week, I still put in 110%. And so I stayed on. I didn't ask for more money, but
And they didn't make you pay for those guitars, obviously.
I didn't have to pay for them. No, when we got to San Francisco, we rented from Studio Instrument Rentals. When we got to LA, they went to some famous record store and bought guitars. One of the things I learned from that is if you're going to go on tour, find something you can play. If you have your fancy guitar or the one your grandmother gave you or the one you've recorded the hit Grammy on, leave it at home.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Learn that on a tour, your guitars are a tool. They're a screwdriver like any other tool, and just get what you can play. And, that way your prize guitar is not going to get scratched, stolen, broke.
Right. And those guitars never showed up, I imagine.
Those guitars have never shown up as far as I know to this day.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's a tough lesson. That's for sure.
Yes.
But I'm sure you balanced those out with plenty of good memories over the years.
There were a lot of good memories.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to meet a lot of people. I got to do a lot of things. I threw Quincy Jones off a...
For what?
When I was with the Daz Band, we were opening for Quincy Jones. I was on stage, and my guitars are sitting on the sides, on guitar stands. And this is a kind of a rickety stage. It's about 4 feet in the air. And this guy comes up on stage and he's standing there off the side of the stage watching the band. And I, after a while, he starts kind of dancing type thing. And I said, look, I don't mind you being up here. Just, don't dance around because these guitars are, delicate and, they're in tune. I don't want you to knock them out of tune, things like that. He says, no problem. And then later on, he starts doing it again. And I said, hey, and he looks at me and he says, do you know who I am? And I said, no, I don't. And I said, security, him, off the stage. Okay. So he leaves. I'm loading the truck and somebody comes over and says, did you throw somebody off the stage? I said, yeah. Told him why. He said, that was Quincy Jones. And I went, you're kidding. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay. So I went over to the dressing room and knocked on the door, asked if I could see him. He came to the door and I apologized profusely. He said, don't worry about it, man. You're doing your job. It's not a problem.
Sure. Yeah. That's a memory for sure. Wow. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you reminiscing with me today from those Erie days all the way through throwing Quincy Jones off the stage and filling in.
I really miss the Erie County Fieldhouse jobs.
As do a lot of people. Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot. I even miss doing ice capades and things like that. Like I said, I worked with Vinny quite often.
Yeah.
And doing that, we did ice capades and things like that and horse shows and things where we had to run follow spots. And I even miss that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a unique place.
Another fun story is the opening show at the Civic Center.
The Beach Boys.
Was the Beach Boys.
Right.
Okay. So the Beach Boys came in and walked up to Vinny and said, so who's the rigger? And Vinny said, well, hold on a minute.
And this is Vinny Marchand, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Gotcha.
Okay. Now you have to understand that at the Erie County Fieldhouse, you had to ground support everything. You could not hang from the ceiling there. Okay. So nothing was ever hung from the ceiling there because it's a shed. It's a tin room.
Right. I was going to say I can't support it. Yeah.
Right. So at the time, there was no other venues in Erie that anybody ever did any rigging at. So he came over to me and he says, John, do you know how to do rigging? I went, yeah. He goes, you're the rigger. Okay.
So what does that mean?
That means I climbed up into the ceiling and hung all the points for the Beach Boys.
Wow.
Okay. And it was because when I was on Rick James' tour, one of my other side jobs was I was a ground rigger. So I knew a lot about rigging at the time.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I rigged the Beach Boys for the first show.
Wow. All right.
Okay. After that, the Caesar Angler or Belkin would bring in steelworkers from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Okay. And they did all the other ones.
Gotcha.
At the first show, Beach Boys, I did it.
Yeah, it was you. All right. Good claim to fame.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, this was fun. I appreciate you talking with me today and talking about the Stabilizers. A lot of folks remember that time, and a lot of folks remember all these bands. So, like I said at the beginning, you were one of those folks that's not a musician, but you were integral to a lot of those performances back then. So I appreciate you reaching out to me and sharing all your stories with me today.
All I can say is to everybody who might be listening to this, support your local bands.
That's right.
You know, you never know who's going to go where, when, and you might want to be the guy that just goes, hey, I saw them win.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's a good way to end it. I appreciate it. Well, John Farr, thanks a lot for talking with me today.
All right. Chip, you have a good day.
Thanks for listening, and special thanks to the JPT Foundation for sponsoring the podcast and for letting us use their events hall once a month for our free music night featuring the Fabulous Leftovers. They're a band of longtime Erie musicians who play for an hour and then are followed by 2 hours of an open mic. All the proceeds for the event go to the Second Harvest Food Bank. The music nights are held the first Tuesday of the month from 6 to 9 at the Events Hall, which is located on West 38th Street in the plaza right next to Our Lady of Peace Church. And finally, for information on what bands and musicians are playing in Erie and the surrounding area, please check out Jack Stevenson's Two-Man Happy Hour podcast and webpage. Jack gives you all the details you need each week on who is playing where. That's Two-Man Happy Hour podcast. So I'm Chip Shell, and I thank you again for listening to the Erie Music History Podcast.